Could a second whistle be ready to blow against President Trump? The New York Times reports another official with more direct knowledge of events is weighing a separate formal complaint. The paper cites two sources briefed on the matter: a White House under pressure and now under subpoena.
Shifty Schiff. How about Shifty Schiff?
While the president mocked one of his impeachment adversaries,
He lies like a son of a gun.
three committee chairmen delivered a stern message late Friday. We deeply regret that President Trump has put us and the nation in this position, accusing the president of stonewalling. His actions have left us no choice but to issue this subpoena, demanding the White House turn over documents related to the president's efforts to get Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. The White House responded, "This subpoena changes nothing. The president did nothing wrong."
I'm only interested in corruption. I don't care about politics. I don't care about Biden's politics.
Surrounded by reporters in Los Angeles, Biden shot back.
All this talk of the president about corruption comes from the most corrupt president we've had in modern history. He's the definition of corruption.
The president dismissed the impact of newly released text messages.
Sir, can we talk about the text messages that included holding off a visit to the White House?
The one text message that I saw
Sent by Trump-appointed State Department officials who floated a White House meeting if Ukraine cooperated.
But included, sir, was a visit to the White House.
The president used his hand to blunt questions.
There's no quid pro quo. He said that.
Other developments in the impeachment inquiry. The Intelligence Community Inspector General testified behind closed doors Friday about the whistleblower complaint. And for the first time, Congress requested the vice president turn over his documents about his own Ukraine contacts. The VP's office called that another attempt by the do-nothing Democrats to call attention to their partisan impeachment. And in a separate development that the White House will certainly be watching, Ukraine's top prosecutor has announced on Friday that he will do a review of past investigations, including one involving the company where Hunter Biden served on the board. Now, this is being described as an audit of past cases that could be completed by next month. Peter, Chanel?
Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Thank you.
A lot of moving parts. We're going to try to break it all down for you now. Let's bring in NBC News analyst Matthew Miller, who was a top Justice Department official during the Obama administration. Matt, the Mueller investigation took 2 years, but this inquiry is escalating in a hurry. Let's catch people up here. The week started with President Trump demanding to meet the whistleblower. Then on Wednesday, at that contentious news conference, the president brushed off a crucial question about what exactly he wanted Ukraine to do about Joe Biden and his son Hunter. But the next day on the South Lawn, President Trump publicly urged China to investigate the Bidens. Then on Friday, House Democrats from 3 committees subpoenaed documents from the White House. Now overnight, of course, this second intelligence official, a possible new whistleblower, has reportedly spoken to the Inspector General about the president's actions regarding Ukraine. Matt, the question for you is, how valuable would another witness be, especially if this person has more direct information about what happened, as the Times reports?
It would be critical. If you read the whistleblower's complaint, the first whistleblower's complaint, he makes clear that there were multiple U.S. officials who raised red flags to him about misconduct inside the administration. The Republicans have attacked that whistleblower as having secondhand information, but of course what that means is that there are a number of witnesses inside the administration who could come forward. And if there is a second whistleblower that comes forward and gives direct information, I think that raises the question of whether there are more witnesses. Presumably both of these people would go talk to the Intelligence Committee and would provide the names of officials who could come and provide further evidence of misconduct by the president or, others around him.
So, Matt, then on that note, we just talked about the fact that the president, this week publicly called on China to investigate Biden's dealings. And he did that in front of all of these reporters on the South Lawn. So I guess the question is, on its face, at the end of the day, is asking a foreign government for assistance in an election illegal?
It is. It is a crime under U.S. law. It's also, by most accounts of constitutional scholars, an impeachable offense. And I think the president's kind of brazen call in public for not just one country, but now a second country to interfere in our election, similar to what he did in the 2016 election when he had his famous Russia, if you're listening moment, it raises the stakes for impeachment because it means we're not just looking at the president's past conduct, what he did with respect to Ukraine and this call of President Zelensky and this months-long effort to get them to investigate Joe Biden. but it raises the question of whether he's going to keep inviting foreign interference in the election and whether, as long as he's president, whether we can have a free and fair election in 2020 if there are other countries being invited to openly interfere and retaliate against Donald Trump's political opponents.
Matt, we heard the president. He denies any quid pro quo relating to Ukraine. But according to those text messages, his top diplomats on that issue appeared to view it very differently. How damaging are those text messages?
I think they're incredibly damaging. If you look at one of the text messages, Kurt Volker, who was the president's envoy to Ukraine, made clear to the Ukrainians that there was a direct quid pro quo, that if you want to get a meeting with President Trump, something that they very much wanted for a variety of reasons, you need to announce these investigations publicly. And then another one of the officials seemed to think that there was also a quid pro quo for the Ukrainians to get aid only if they announced these investigations. So you have now direct evidence of the thing that the president has denied. And that's problematic because Republicans have tried to say the bar for misconduct is not inviting a foreign government to interfere. It's if there is a quid pro quo. Well, we saw direct evidence of a quid pro quo in these messages.
Can't say we don't live in interesting times. Matt Miller, thank you very much.